Tonight on Receipts and Reprobates, Jeffrey Edward Epstein, a bloke who started as a high school maths teacher without a degree, and somehow speed ran into high finance like he'd found a cheat code. People always ask, how did he make his money? Wrong first question. Try, how did he get into the room? Because the origin story isn't just weird, it's the Rosetta Stone for the whole mess. Let's follow the money backwards, past the private islands and the bankers who shrugged, past the shell companies and the consulting fees, all the way to the first hinge that swung open for a guy with no qualifications, no portfolio, and vibes like a red flag convention. Spoiler, the doors he used were labelled social capital. And the doormen? Teachers, parents, bankers, billionaires. Gilded keycard access for a man who kept saying, "Trust me." The teacher's lounge heist. Epstein did not graduate from university. He attended Cooper Union and NYU's Current Institute, then dipped, no degree. And yet, at 21, he's suddenly teaching physics and maths at the Dalton School, one of Manhattan's poshest private schools. Wild, right? You'd think elite schools want elite credentials. Dalton didn't. At least not then. Even Dalton insiders later described that era as full of unconventional hires. Translation, interesting choices were made. Now, the urban legend says Donald Barr, yes, the father of later Attorney General Bill Barr, personally hired Epstein. That makes for a spicy meme, but the documented truth is murkier. Barr left Dalton 3 months before Epstein started, and reputable reporting says it's unclear if Barr hired him. Mystery remains. Conspiracy theorists, please hold your tweets. So there he is, a 21-year-old, no degree, teaching ultra-rich teenagers on the Upper East Side. If you're writing a heist movie, this is where your protagonist slips through a side door and smiles at the CCTV. Because Dalton wasn't just a school, it was a network hub with a parents' directory that doubled as a private sector LinkedIn. And in that lounge of power, Epstein finds his first escalator. While teaching at Dalton, he began tutoring the son of Bear Stearns chairman Alan Ace Greenberg and was friendly with Greenberg's daughter. Guess what happens next? He lands at Bear Stearns, straight from the classroom to Wall Street, because proximity plus polish plus a parent's recommendation beats a CV any day ending in day. This isn't speculation, it's in contemporaneous reporting from Vanity Fair, back when Epstein still hid behind the word enigmatic. MBA? Nah, he had a PTA, the bare necessities, and a Reg D. Epstein joins Bear Stearns in 1976 as a junior assistant to a floor trader. He's bright, numerate, quick with derivatives. Remember, the man loved maths, and he hops up the snakes and ladders to options trading and then to advising rich clients. 4 years in, he's a limited partner, not shabby for a bloke whose last job perk was cafeteria fish sticks. In 1981, he exits Bear after what he called a Reg D violation, a private placement rule issue. According to his own sworn account years later, he spins it as a technical infraction, nothing to see. Either way, he's out. Let's sit with that pivot. He arrives on Wall Street because a chairman's family likes him. He rises fast. He leaves under a compliance cloud. No degree, no traditional provenance, just connections and momentum. And yet nobody slams the door behind him. Why? Because finance is a vibe economy at the top. If the right people say you're clever, the rest of the industry nods in unison like bobbleheads. Early lesson of the Epstein saga. In elite finance, fit can mean your name is in the right people's mouths. That's not a meritocracy, that's a whisperocracy. Bounty hunter at your service. After Bear, Epstein starts Intercontinental Assets Group, IAG, in 1981. What does it do? Depends who's asking. He called himself a high-level bounty hunter, recovering embezzled funds for governments and billionaires, and sometimes consulting for the people who did the embezzling. That double-entry morality, it's very on brand. He also told friends he had a firearms license. The myth-making ramps up. Opaque jobs with big clients. Stories that make him sound indispensable and just dangerous enough to be irresistible. Here's the tactical brilliance. I find a lost money is a network magnet. If you're rich and embarrassed because your assets got nicked, you don't want a paper trail, you want a fixer. If you're the fixer, you get to collect IOUs, confidences and favours. That's better than carry. It's collateralized gossip. My co-host told me this is where my script can get people to consider alternative angles. While I know this to be true, I also know this is the main reason I was convinced to share my thoughts. To be a voice that gives alternative perspectives, even if they are unlikely or unpopular. People love the Epstein made his fortune from blackmail theory, but the real magic trick appears to be softer. He sold confidence as a service, then charged people for the privilege of not asking questions. The Ponzi proximity problem, mid-80s, enter Stephen Hoffenberg and Towers Financial Corporation, a debt collection empire that was secretly a massive Ponzi scheme. Hoffenberg later claimed he hired Epstein in 1987 at $25,000 a month, lent him $2 million, and tried to use him in corporate raids on Pan Am and Emory. Hoffenberg went to prison for the fraud, 18 years. Epstein, he was never charged in the Towers case. Hoffenberg later cast Epstein as the mastermind. Others disputed that. What's not disputed is that Epstein worked with Towers while Hoffenberg's fraud ballooned. Why does this matter for the origin story? Because it shows a pattern. Epstein hovered near pots of opaque money and powerful men in chaotic moments. Whether it's recovery work or consulting, he's wherever the ledger is fuzzy and the law is peeking through blinds. If Dalton was the side door, Towers is the corridor where he learned exactly how elastic rules can be if your patrons like your answers. This is also where the CV starts to make internal sense. Bear Stearns taught him how the instruments work. Towers taught him how people in finance actually use them. The Wexner download. Then we hit the jackpot connection. Leslie H. Wexner, retail billionaire, the limited Victoria's Secret. Epstein meets Wexner in the mid to late 1980s, becomes his personal financial consigliere, and in 1991 Wexner signs over sweeping power of attorney. Basically, you can act as me. That's hiring authority, signing checks, buying and selling properties, the whole please pilot my fortune bundle. Public reporting and corporate documents confirm Epstein's unusually deep control. And then there's 9 East 71st Street, the 7-story palace often billed as New York's largest private home. It was associated with Wexner for years, then in 2011 transferred to an Epstein-linked entity for $0 on paper. Zero, zilch, free 99. Yes, there are internal trust mechanics and prior beneficial interests. Yes, zero indeed transfers can be shorthand for intra-trust conveyance, but the optics, nuclear. The property later sold for about $51 million after Epstein's death. Wexner later said Epstein misappropriated vast sums from him and broke ties. That is not me being spicy, that's Wexner's claim. It's a giant neon sign over the entry question. The way Epstein moved money, other people's money, was his ladder. Through Wexner, Epstein turns from clever fixer into the guy who looks like a billionaire because he effectively plugs into a billionaire's electrical panel. The Shell Game, Deluxe USVI edition. By the late 90s, Epstein is running J. Epstein & Co., and later Financial Trust Company, out of the US Virgin Islands. Why the islands? Because the USVI's Economic Development Commission offered bonkers tax breaks to firms that tick the right boxes, think 90% cuts in certain taxes. Epstein's entities like Southern Trust secured those incentives for years. Regulators and later court filings say the supposed biomedical and financial informatics business looked like a sham. Little actual tech staff, uncanny payroll choices, high driver, high model, and big flows of money labelled consulting. Multiple investigations detail how those incentives added up to massive tax savings. Remember the banks that helped give Epstein's money respectability? They've been paying for that lapse. Deutsche Bank paid $150 million to New York regulators in 2020 for compliance failures tied to Epstein accounts. JP Morgan Chase paid $290 million to Epstein victims and $75 million to the USVI to settle claims it enabled his crimes. Those aren't rumors, those are settlements, consent orders, and press releases. The compliance failures weren't that they didn't know who Epstein was. They didn't act like it mattered. Institutional vibe check failed. Liquid funding and the repo men. Side quest but telling. From roughly 2000 to 2007, Epstein chaired an offshore outfit called Liquid Funding Ltd, with Bear Stearns originally owning 40%. The firm played in repo markets using structured products, exactly the kind of collateral that turned out to be, imaginative, in the run-up to the 2008 crisis. That company's existence and his role are documented in offshore filings and reporting. Does this prove he engineered Bear's implosion? No. Does it show he was inside the plumbing of the pre-crash credit machine? Very much yes. It's a motif that keeps looping. The credentials never quite match the access, but he's always sitting next to the big levers. The late-stage whales, aka Liam Black and friends. Fast forward, after Epstein's first conviction in 2008, you'd think the moneyed world would ghost him. Many didn't. The biggest known pipeline was Leon Black, co-founder of Apollo. An independent review by law firm DeShare, released by Apollo's board and filed with the SEC, concluded Black paid Epstein about $158 million between 2012 and 2017 for tax and estate planning. Later, Senate Finance materials and reporting suggested the number could be higher, around $170 million. Googleable, citable, jaw-dropping. Black resigned from Apollo leadership amid the scandal. He denies wrongdoing and says the services were legitimate. Whatever the legal merits, the money streams show how Epstein monetized the perception that he was the guy who knew the back doors. Brilliant tax whisperer is just the 2010s flavor of the same pitch he made in the 80s. I know how to make problems go away. That's what the whales were buying. That and plausible deniability. Back to the first door. Let's answer the user's core question plainly, receipts in hand. He didn't start with money or credentials. Epstein was a bright Brooklyn kid who didn't finish uni. Fact. He got into finance through elite social proximity, specifically the Dalton network, tutoring the Bear Stearns chairman's son, while teaching at Dalton, led directly to his hire at Bear. Fact. Gatekeepers bent rules. Dalton hired him sans degree during an era of unconventional staffing. Bear elevated him fast. Later, billionaires ceded him abnormal control, e.g. Wexner's power of attorney. Facts. He specialized in grey zone problems, recovering money, corporate raids with a Ponzi schema, tax arbitrage, offshore structures, USVI incentives. Facts. Banks and institutions validated him long after they shouldn't have. Documented fines and settlements say the quiet part for us. Facts. So how did he get in? A private school corridor. Who kept him in? A cartel of deference, the kind that confuses audacity with genius and connections with credibility. This wasn't merit. It was access arbitrage. The satirical bit you can't make up because it's all real. His whole origin story reads like satire. Underqualified teacher hired by elite school during a vibes-based hiring spree? Check. Networking his way into a Wall Street seat by tutoring the chairman's kid? Check. Exits for a compliance issue but rebrands as a fixer bounty hunter? Check. Partners with a Ponzi baron, dodges charges when the baron goes down? Check. Becomes the billionaire's billionaire handler with a power of attorney and a $0 townhouse transfer? Double check. Parks businesses in a US territory with 90% tax breaks, then banks look the other way until regulators bring the hammer? Triple check. You see the shape. A ladder built from other people's authority. Epstein didn't hack finance. Finance is built with holes for people like him, charismatic fixers who make rich people feel safer about their money than compliance departments ever could. Receipt corner, the 5 load-bearing facts. Let's nail the essentials you can name drop mid-monologue. Dalton hire without a degree, unconventional hires era, unclear if Donald Barr hired him. Bear Stearns entry via Greenberg family connection while at Dalton, quick rise to limited partner, departure after Reg D issue. Hoffenberg Towers, Epstein worked there. Hoffenberg convicted in vast Ponzi, Hoffenberg alleged Epstein's heavy involvement, Epstein not charged, Wexner power of attorney and $0 transfer of 9 East 71st Street, later claims of misappropriation of vast sums, banks penalised, settled over Epstein ties, Deutsche Bank 150 milli, JP Morgan 75 milli to USVI, plus earlier 290 million to victims. These are the load-bearing walls. Build your satire around them, the rest is wallpaper. Picture it, 1970s Manhattan. A young man with sharp elbows and sharper cheekbones is hired to teach calculus to kids whose surnames come embossed on buildings. He clocks the room. At Dalton, the parents are the prey, and the prey are delighted. You don't need a degree if Mum's Christmas party includes a vice chairman. You don't need Series 7 if you've already got Series Dad. He pivots to Bear Stearns, derivatives, options, special products, proving that in finance, competence is impressive but contact is king. Then the compliance cloud rolls in and he sheds it like a skin. No job, no problem. He invents a title, bounty hunter. He invents a market, lost money. He invents demand. Shame needs discretion, and discretion bills by the hour. Cue Hoffenberg and the towers of other people's cash. Epstein swims in the foam of a Ponzi and comes out dry. The lesson lands: if you are always the consultant, your fingerprints are everywhere and nowhere. If you are always the friend of a friend, you live in someone else's blind spot. Then Wexner, the billionaire who hands over the keys, makes the myth solid. With POA in hand, Epstein becomes a sovereign state of one. He walks through properties like a ghost, and the deeds move themselves. The townhouse at 9 East 71st changes hands for $0, and the only people who blink are the neighbours. Meanwhile, the tax arbitrage grows legs. The US Virgin Islands roll out the red carpet, 90% tax clemency if you promise you're doing informatics by the frozen yogurt shop. The shell companies breed, the banks nod along. Compliance software throws a tantrum, relationship managers chuck it out the window. It's not a mystery, it's a business model. Turn reputational risk into revenue and pay the fine later. Even in the 2010s, after a conviction, whales keep visiting this particular harbour. One of the biggest, Leon Black, wires 8-digit advisory fees to the man everyone knew was radioactive. Because nothing glows quite like certainty on your taxes. Ask any billionaire. If a fixer finds you a loophole, you don't ask how he found the door, you ask where to send the retainer. This is the origin story, not a mastermind so much as a mirror held up to the way the rich move, with introductions, not interviews, with favours, not forms, with absolution outsourced to people like Epstein. When a system values who you know over what you are, men like him become a feature, not a bug. Antidotes to myth, so no one sues us, and also because truth matters. Did Donald Barr definitely hire Epstein? Unclear. Reputable outlets caution it's not established. Did Epstein mastermind towers? Hoffenberg said so after prison. Epstein denied it. Prosecutors didn't charge Epstein in that case. Was Epstein some genius investor? Evidence says he was a genius networker who monetized tax tactics, secrecy, and proximity, plus at least one billionaire's checkbook and extraordinary legal authority. Did offshore structures and entities like liquid funding exist? Yes, documented in filings and reputable reporting. The 40% bear tie is in public summaries. We keep the satire spicy, but the bones are facts. The thesis in one breath. He didn't hack the system, he surfed it. From a school that prized surnames over CVs, to a bank that prized confidence over controls, to billionaires who prized outcomes over explanations. Every rung on his ladder was someone else's reputation. He didn't make his fortune from a brilliant strategy. He made himself useful to people who didn't want to explain what they were doing with their money. And that, more than any single con, is how a man with no degree, no license, and no shame walked into finance and left muddy footprints on the ceiling. And if that makes you queasy about the rooms where money moves, good. You're supposed to feel it.